It appears to me that we have found ourselves at the junction of a release of the new Knives Out film, Glass Onion. The new film Glass Onion just released on Netflix a few days prior to Christmas, and with the success of Knives Out, it's not a big surprise that I was first on the bandwagon to watch this film. I saw Knives Out in the movie theaters in 2019 and remember being absolutely blown away with how meticulously every detail was crafted. I try not to have high expectations going into movies, but with Glass Onion I really just couldn't help it. I expected the moon and more, and quite honestly, I think we got that. Since this movie is a mystery and the less you know the better before you watch it, I don't want to go into plot details too much, but there are a few things that I'm gonna have to touch on, so just keep that in mind if you continue to watch and have plans to see Glass Onion at a later date. First up, and quite possibly the defining features of these Knives Out films, is the cast. Where Knives Out had a larger ensemble cast, Glass Onion aims for something a bit smaller. Instead of a rich family's mansion, this film takes place on a secluded island owned by a rich guy, so kind of close but not that far off. Either way, there are 10 but really 9 important characters on the island for the duration of the film. Of course, some of those actors include Daniel Craig, Ed Norton, Dave Bautista, Kate Hudson, and so on. The script is written in such a way that, especially during the introduction scene on the dock, every character has their chance to shine, connect with the audience, and show their own unique nature in terms of the rest of the ensemble cast. Something that, if it wasn't done correctly, could make a few characters seem more important than others. And of course, some characters are more important, but you don't really know that yet at the beginning of the movie. So the way the script was written, perfect in my book. In Knives Out, you're sort of learning the basis of the story through the eyes of Ana de Armas's character, and then later shifted to Daniel Craig's Benoit Blanc. In Glass Onion, however, it's a little bit different in that it's all Benoit Blanc that you're following. You don't know any of these characters, he doesn't know any of these characters. You're more or less learning information at the same rate that he is. Albeit he knows a little bit more, but again, you don't know that yet. This is where I'm going to touch on a few spoilery details, so keep your guard up. Edward Norton plays Miles Braun, a rich narcissist tech millionaire, let's say. It's implied that Miles Braun made all of his money through ideas and research breakthroughs that he's made. And as the plot of the film continues, it shows you that Miles Braun has never had an original idea in his life. So taking the idiot who believes he's the smartest guy in the room and pairing him with the world's greatest detective, not Batman, although they do make a quick joke about that, is a great dynamic, because where Knives Out, Ransom wasn't really seen that much. Miles Braun as the antagonist, whether he committed the murder or not, is a perfect foil to Benoit Blanc, the smartest guy and the dumbest guy. It's genuinely a joyous relationship to see unfold on screen. Speaking of actor chemistry, again with Daniel Craig, Janelle Monáe, the two of them have an amazing chemistry regardless of whether Janelle Monáe is portraying Andy or Helen. Obviously, you have more screen time with Blanc and Helen than Blanc and Andy, but it just speaks to the volumes of talent that both actors have under their belts to be able to portray multiple characters and still maintain that sort of fantastic chemistry between each other. In terms of characters, most people on the island, as they call themselves, the Disruptors, are genuinely bad people. I mean, in Knives Out, sure, the family was the rich folk that just wanted to keep their money in the family, but the Disruptors will stab each other in the back to make sure that their reputation is not the one being tarnished. And that comes into play in the movie as a actually massive plot point towards the end. To me, the only one that felt out of place was Whiskey, Duke's girlfriend. She's more of an instrument that Duke uses to pursue his online presence and his channel media. Whiskey, of course, has her own ideas and own thoughts, but she feels she can't get out of the turning wheel role in Duke's mission. Yet she also sees it as a way to start promoting her own brand and her own channel presence. However, she's kind of stuck in a weird spot where she doesn't want to agree with everything Duke does, but he has to, or else he'll stop promoting her and she won't get what she needs. So she's kind of between a rock and a hard place. There are certain scenes where she has conversations with Helen, who she believes is Andy, and Whiskey really feels like the most genuine person, rather than any of the other disruptors that wouldn't help their own grandma if it meant that they were surviving. Long story short, what I'm trying to say is that the script does a magnificent job at juggling all of these characters, but still making them all feel genuinely important in this 2-hour runtime. The plot in and of itself is great as well. The mystery is gripping and entertaining, always keeping the viewer on their toes, but in some cases, making the viewer even question themselves. There are certain shots that are shown multiple times in multiple different ways to make you really question what you saw or what you think you saw. I think that is a great way of storytelling in terms of films. It takes the unreliable narrator trope and puts that into the entire film to make an unreliable plot. Now, I know that seems a little contradictory, maybe a little insulting to the viewer, but when you have this sort of mystery movie where everyone's trying to figure out everything, it makes a lot of sense. It also keeps the viewer from figuring anything out too early as to maintain the surprise at the end of the film. Some of that turns into what's called plot dump, where Benoit Blanc has to stand there and explain what happened off screen, what the motives were, what he figured out, and I understand how that can be bad for some viewers, how some viewers dislike that, but there's really no other way for the movie to do that without it feeling cheap. Take, for example, the Helen and Andy story. If the backstory of Helen becoming Andy is never explained, and it is revealed regardless that Helen is portraying Andy, it would feel lazy, that there's no explanation, and that would be a huge degrading point for the film. So, flashbacks it is. My one problem with the movie is that the film begins in the midst of the 2020 pandemic lockdowns. We get it. We lived through COVID. It was not fun. Nobody enjoyed it. Leave it out of the movies. We don't need to be reminded. I understand it's trying to be socially contemporary, it's trying to stick with the times, the film was written during the pandemic, but when you watch the movie, you'll understand that if that COVID point was taken out entirely, the movie would have been exactly the same, because it never came into play. Not even once. It made a few quick jokes about Birdie J and how she is the comedic relief of the group, but other than that, does not matter. I think that the term glass onion is a fantastic title to put on a film about a character like Miles Braun. Miles Braun is the kind of person to think that the term glass onion is some sort of complex way into his mind, where, like Benoit Blanc mentions in the movie, it has all these see-through transparent layers, but the center is always visible and always the most important part. Miles Braun, however, is kind of the opposite. He doesn't have an important core to look at. Like I said, he's never had an original idea. All those layers that surrounds his core belong to somebody else. And Braun is the exact person to think that glass onion is the thing that describes his life, when in reality, it's the complete opposite. And even when you look at Glass Onion as the Beatles song, a song that's trying to sort of confuse listeners or point them in the wrong direction with Strawberry Fields and the Walrus, you know, Paul is the Walrus. Already the film is centering itself in a piece of media that's meant to distract and distort. Made apparent when you watch the film, again, in the scenes that are shown in different ways. Rian Johnson and the filmmaking team behind Glass Onion left no stone unturned when it comes to creating a mystery classic. There is not one moment in this film that the narrative drags, there is not one moment that the viewer is bored or feels the need to look away from the screen. If anything, 2 or 3 viewings is more or less required. The amount of joy you can get out of watching this movie again and again and finding the small details, like the lighter that Miles Braun uses at the very beginning of the film, comes into play at the very end. There is not one detail that a viewer can see that does not become important by the end of the film. Both Knives Out and Glass Onion do this very frequently and make it a main storytelling technique. To me, this is the epitome of show, don't tell storytelling. Please, if you have any interest in mystery movies, do yourself a favor. First, subscribe to Netflix if you haven't already, and 2, sit down and watch Glass Onion. You will not be disappointed. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any other movies that I should cover, and catch you in the next one.